Okay, thank you very much. I would like to welcome all participants of the first webinar, which is organized by Nuclear Transparency Watch. We will have a kind of each one meeting just to present the work we did, and my presentation will be the first one. It will talk about the radioactive waste management and transparency and public participation. The work was performed in the frame of one of the projects NTW is involved in, namely the EC program, EURAT. It's the European program on radioactive waste management, but these contributions will focus on the description of the national cases we developed, and some of the participants here are also the co-author or main author of this contribution, so I will go slowly through that. The general frame for the webinar is that so Nuclear Transparency Watch has evaluated the application of transparency and public participation in the development of national radioactive waste management programs with several national case studies. In the case studies, examples are included from the early stage and advanced programs on radioactive waste management with both large and small inventories. Each case has a different context, national, but in all they consider the management of spent fuel or radioactive waste, the current developments, the judicial situation, and their focus on the ongoing national situation, so whatever the situation is. It can be seen, that in many countries, especially on the West and North, the advances in the spent fuel management, high-level waste management is quite impressive. But in the countries on the South and East, the organizations are still dealing with the low and intermediate level waste management, particular establishment of the repositories. Each of the case also discuss how transparency and public participation are applied concerning the access of information, access to and effectiveness of public participation consultation, access to justice, and access to resources. These criteria are based on the Aarhus Convention and BEPPER report, and also including all different EU level legislation. The series is introduced by an assessment overview of good and bad examples from the perspective of key elements with lessons taken from each case. One case study will be presented every month from February to December 2023 to allow exchanges of information among civil society members to help broader understanding and views. This is the summary of this first presentation, which is a kind of introductory. What are the criteria for transparency we taken into account? What are the results from one questionnaire we applied within the multi-stakeholders involved in the EURAT program, but not only, also those coming from the larger group of the civil society. Then a brief summary of the national cases and plan for their presentation, and a kind of general recommendation which deals from the findings which we analyzed, which we got from the analysis we performed from the national cases. So which criteria were used in the nuclear field, and also in that way in the field of radioactive waste management? Transparency can be widely understood as pertaining to public information and communication, as well as public participation and access to decision making. There is a consensus at all levels that transparency is essential for effective governance in radioactive waste management. And for the, if you question which are the levels, there are, different organizations involved in the waste management, from the implementers, like waste management organization, to the regulatory functions, like regulatory authorities and technical support organization, and also research entities which deal with the development of the research investigation. But one of the most important actor in this level is, of course, the civil society, and Nuclear Transparency Watch is the organization who lead the civil society organization involvement in this discussion. It is also important to keep in mind the specific international and European legislation on transparency, as well as more specific international and European legislation on transparency with specific relevance to rad waste management. When we discuss the transparency, for example, such legislation includes the provision from the Aarhus and ESPA Convention, and are the most important in this context is the Radioactive Waste Directive and the two directives which transpose the Aarhus Conventions, which is also very relevant. Sometimes I have the problem to move forward. The transparency as defined in the Radioactive Waste Directive, it is simple form. The transparency in rad waste management means the general public is given some elementary information about the rad waste management and projects that relate to rad waste management, and that the general public has the possibility to give its views on rad waste management and projects that relate to rad waste management, and some sort of elementary consultation process. However, in order to be effective, transparency needs to be developed beyond its elementary forms. This was recognized when the European Union developed and adopted the Rad Waste Directive. According to the directive, European member states are required to include a description of their transparency governance in rad waste management and their national programs, and need to report as required by the directive. The big legislation which deals with the transparency is, of course, the Aarhus Convention. For European countries, which include the EU member state, the most important international obligation for transparency is adherence to the Aarhus Convention. It has 3 pillars: access to information, participation in decision-making affecting health or the environment, and right to have access to justice when these rights are denied, or when acts and omissions by private individuals and public authorities contravene provisions of national laws relating to the environment. The countries that are party to the Aarhus Convention are obliged to implement the convention in their national legislation. All EU members are parties. As a party to the Aarhus Convention is also the European Union, which has to implement the convention into the European legislation. And therefore, 2 directives were adopted: Directive for the access to environmental information and Directive on public participation. The 3rd pillar is still not implemented in the EU legislation. NTW did one project with collaboration with the EC, and also published its work as a separate document. And the work focused on the study how effective transparency in RAD-based management could be described. The result was a BEPPER report, which stands for Broad Framework for Effective Public Participation in Environmental Decision-Making and in RAD-based Management, and was published in December 2015. It's available on the NTW web page. And besides the 3 pillars, which are already taken into account and were presenting in the Aarhus Convention, another pillar was introduced, namely the access to effective access to the resources. Resources in this term means the expertise and also financial resources for performing independent reviews, for participating in the legal actions and similar. Just recently, one of NTW members informed that there was a court decision which agreed that the legal resources should be provided to the NGOs to take part in the legal cases in case of the RAD-based management. So this is in a bit a new situation. The BEPPER report goes further in establishing a level system for evaluation of effective transparency in RAD-based management with these 4 pillars. NTW also did a questionnaire within the participants of EURAD, and this questionnaire was built on the civil society members involved in the frame of EURAD project to collect the opinions of participants from the 3 colleges, namely the technical support organization, waste management organization, research entities, plus the views of the larger civil society members which are involved in EURAD. The subject of the questionnaire was the transparency in establishment of national radioactive waste facilities and was based on the provisions of the Aarhus Convention. And the result is that upon the opinion of the respondents in the questionnaire, there is a kind of level of access to information, which is free, digital or printed copies of documents, and the feeling is that the rights have evolved in the good direction over the last decade. Finally, participants generally agreed that information should be available to all, and especially regarding health and environment. With regards to level of access to participation, the result is even better. In general, there is access to local and national consultation meetings, and the feeling that rights have evolved in the good direction over the last decade. It was usually admitted that the process of opening to public participation needs time to be collaborative, ensuring the participation of all community members. However, also here, there are spaces for the improvement. Also, it should be mentioned that most of the countries have established a kind of broader participation in RAD-based management, especially in the cases of the repository development, which are much above the requirements which are given in the legal standards. With regards to the access to the justice, it is agreed that in general there is access to justice in decision-making process, taking into account of question, issues, comments during consultation, and the feeling that rights haven't evolved over the last decade. The main challenges recalled related to access to justice were the time-consuming and expensive process, no legal support, nor clarified legal practices, no independent institutions. Regarding the level of access to resources, in general, there is access to resources, but not from an independent source. And the feeling is that though times some positive evolution of less limitation have been observed. Mostly the resources come from the state or from the waste management organizations directly. Now I will just briefly inform you about the cases which were developed, about the presenters and the time. I guess we will put this presentation also on our website, and I hope our secretary Malcolm has the emails of all people, so he can also simply forward it to you directly. So February, there will be a Swedish case presented by Johan Swan. In March, Danish case by Niels Henrik Hugge. In April, French case by Benoit Jacquet. In May, Greenland by case by Niels Henrik Hugge. In June, Czech case by Hanna Konvalinkova. In September, Dutch case by Jan Haverkamp. In October, Slovakian case by Michal Daniška. In November, a German case by Rebecca Harms, needs to be confirmed still. And in December, British case by Colin Wells. And the recommendations, just briefly, the findings and recommendations from the national cases will be presented for each country specific. But in general, one main issue was found, namely the access to information from waste management organization. During the assessment of the case studies in the report, it was noticed that there were in some countries problems with access to information from waste management organizations, although there is a legal obligation to provide those information. The issue is relevant no matter what their status is, either as a state or a private entity. The main arguments for this are that all environmental information produced and held by waste management organization is an important ingredient for governmental decision procedure concerning radioactive waste. Thus, full access to this information support better quality decisions, and that waste management organization implement governmental policies under oversight of a state authority and deliver a public service. The fact that this is currently not happening in all Aarhus signatory countries and all EU member states. The lack of information is undermining the quality of decision-making around nuclear waste and in those countries, and infringe the rights of citizens to be involved in decision-making. Certainly in an area where intra and intergenerational justice is an important issue, full transparency should be guaranteed. And which relates to the recommendation, for each of the country cases, there will be recommendation for better access to information in relation to rad waste management, for more structure and more continuous public participation in rad waste management, for more harmonized access to justice, and for the access to resources. And with this, I would like to thank you for the participation. And now I believe that we will have some time for the questions and answers.
Just to technical points, the microphone have been deactivated for all, so you can reactivate the microphone if you want to speak on the bottom left of your screen. But before doing it spontaneously, if you can raise your hand, it would be better to organize the question. And you can, of course, if you raise a question, open your camera, it would be even better. And the last thing, if you prefer, you can also write in the comment a question, and I will try to put them forward. Thank you very much.
Good. So this was really an introductory webinar with more information for the